Okay, our study this morning takes us to a faraway place. It's far away from here, and involves some of the countries of southern Africa. As you can see on the picture there, this country in particular was Namibia. At the particular time that the events in the story took place, it was known as Southwest Africa. Let me just give you a little bit of background to Southwest Africa, just as a matter of interest. Southwest Africa was originally part of South Africa. It was one of the provinces, one might say, like Transvaal, Orange Free State, Natal, the Cape Province. There was Southwest Africa. How that happened was that before the Second World War, it was actually a German colony. It was owned by Germany. It was a German colony. Well, at the time when the Second World War broke out, and the Commonwealth countries, including South Africa, joined in with England fighting against the Germans, the South African army went into Southwest Africa and took it over so that they would not have any harassment from the Germans in Southwest Africa. They just took it over. And so it became a South African province almost. Well, Southwest Africa then became Namibia. Today we know it as Namibia, and it's one of those countries, in fact, it's perhaps the principal country that we're going to look at this morning. But our story starts actually in Angola. These are the countries of southern Africa, and our story this morning starts around in this country, but I was not there at the time. I was in this little country here, which was known as Rhodesia, now Zimbabwe. And I lived in a city right in the middle of it there almost, named Gwelo. I was the pastor of the Seventh-day Adventist church there in Gwelo. Now, our story is going to involve Rhodesia, going to involve South Africa, which is the big country right at the very tip of the continent of Africa, and Namibia, which was Southwest Africa, and Angola. So these are the countries that our story this morning is actually going to take us to. Well, as I said, I was the pastor of the Gwelo Church in Rhodesia. Now, this is the reason for all of these events this morning. In Angola, we, Seventh-day Adventist Church, have a missions hospital. Its name is Bongo. That's an African name, Bongo. It's near a town by the name of Huampo. And it's right there near the center of Angola. This is the border of Angola around here. And the Bongo Hospital was just right there, next to that town, Huampo. And it's known as the Bongo Mission Hospital. Now, we had a doctor there by the name of Dr. Parsons, and he was a pilot. He had a Cherokee 180, I believe it was, and he used to fly from the Bongo Hospital, and he used to go to various clinics that were in the outlying areas around Angola, because it's a very, very open country, and there were a lot of people living out in the villages in the surrounding areas who they were not close by to any medical help. So he established these little mission clinics, and he used to fly out to them in his aeroplane so that he could attend to the sick people there. Well, at the time we're talking about, from 1966 until 1989, the Angolans were involved in a civil war which actually involved South Africa, who now possessed Southwest Africa, in that the FNLA, I believe it was FNLA, because they were the federal, I don't know, it was Portuguese, but it was kind of like the Federation of the National Liberation of Angola, something like that. That's what their letters stood for. They were trying to take over the whole of the country, but in the south here, there was a group of people who were called UNITA. There was a UNITA faction, and these two were fighting. But UNITA was not as strong as the FNLA. The FNLA had arms and ammunition being supplied to them by the communist countries, China and Russia particularly. So UNITA was not able to stand up against them. So the South African army moved into Southwest Africa in big time and was supplying UNITA with arms and ammunition. And they were stationed along the border here. Actually, they went into Angola at one time, pushed the FNLA all the way back up the top there, and then they came back. They went back down into Southwest Africa and secured the border. Well, the problem with this war that was going on in Angola here is that the FNLA were terrorizing the local population. Anyone who had any ties with UNITA or any sympathies with UNITA the atrocities that were being performed against these people was absolutely terrible. Now you can imagine that the Bongo Mission Hospital right in the middle of this lot was in danger. It was constantly in danger. Now a lot of the people, the locals that were living in Angola, because of this strife and the UNITA people that were members of the UNITA party, they had to leave their homes and flee the FNLA, and they established a refugee camp down here at the town right on the border between Southwest Africa and Angola, and the name of that town was Runtu. All right. Now the South African Air Force, there was an airport there. It had a paved runway and everything at Runtu, and the South African Air Force took over that airport there and established it as a military air base so that they could operate from there, operate over Angola. They had jet fighters there, as I'll show you in just a little minute. Now, what happened? The FNLA were terrorizing the population in an area near the Bongo Mission Hospital here, and the locals that lived around the mission came to the mission and said, look, you've got to get out of here. You're going to have to leave because they're going to come here and they are going to terrorize you people. I mean, these people, they were raping the women and burning their houses down and all kinds of things. So they said, you've got to leave. So the mission people, Dr. Parsons and the others with the mission there said, well, you guys, what are you going to do? They said, well, we're heading down to Runtu, where the refugee camp has been established. We're going down there. So Dr. Parsons says, well, look, I'll tell you what we'll do. Form a convoy. We'll get all of the people in the mission station here, get their vehicles, load them up, put their belongings in them. You folks do the same with your stuff. Get all your vehicles, trucks and cars or whatever it is. Load all your stuff up, and we'll drive down there as a convoy. And I will go ahead of you in my plane. I will fly ahead of you in my airplane, and I will see if I see any FNLA factions or groups of that around, then I can warn you on the radio, because they had radio, two-way radio communication. I'll warn you on the radio and tell you to stop or wait or turn off, go off another road, or what to do so that you can get down there safely. Well, he did that. He flew ahead of them. He'd go big circles. He'd fly ahead of them. And eventually they arrived in Runtu at the refugee station. Well, you say, well, how did that affect you? You're living in Rhodesia. Well, now I'm going to tell you. So, okay, these people, all these that were surrounding here, the mission personnel and everything, they all came down to Runtu, and of course the Americans and the missionaries and that, they were able to come into Southwest Africa and go home or wherever they were going to go. Dr. Parsons was actually in Southwest Africa for a while. Well, I was sitting in my home, actually at the office in the church in Gwelo, Rhodesia. That's where I was sitting in my office there at the church one day. And the phone went. And a man on the other end of the phone had a Portuguese accent. Remember, Angola was a Portuguese colony, right? Had a Portuguese accent, and he called me, and he said to me, Pastor Wilton, you're Seventh-day Adventist pastor in Gwelo. I said, yes, that's correct. And then he told me the story of what had happened over there in Angola. And he says, what I'm looking for is someone to go to South Africa and to get the papers from Pretoria, that's one of the capitals of South Africa where the Department of Internal Affairs is based, and to get permission for my relatives who are at Runtu in Angola to come through South Africa to come up to Rhodesia. And I've got to get the paperwork here settled in Rhodesia here. But before I can do that, I need to have someone that can say that they can come through South Africa, So I said, well, why are you calling me? So he told me because of Dr. Parsons and how good the people were at the mission station. He said, my relatives cannot sing their praises highly enough. His brother, I guess, was the leader of that group over there. By the way, there were 21 of his relatives in Angola, in that refugee camp, 21 of them. And his brother was the leader. So he said, he just cannot sing the praises enough of you Seventh-day Adventists, of how you were so nice at the mission station, what good you did in Angola, and how Dr. Parsons flew ahead, and all at their own expense. And he said, they just got us down to Runtu safely, and he said, now they're stuck. So I said, well, what about the pastor in Salisbury? Why didn't you not call him? Because that's the capital, and I was in Gwelo, and that was... So he said, well, I went to him,
And I spoke to him, and he said, well, there's nothing he can do. He's here in Rhodesia, so he couldn't do anything. So he said, that's why I'm calling you. Well, folks, you call me on an adventure like that, and I'm gone. I'm going. There's nothing will keep me back. Any adventure like that, I'm in it. So anyway, I had to get permission. So I went to the conference president. We had the conference offices were in Gwelo, where I was the pastor. So his office was just down the hallway. So I went down and I told him all about it. So he looked at me with a smile on his face and says, you really want to go, don't you? And I said, I really want to go. Yeah, please. So he said, okay, you go. So I phoned the fellow back and I said, I got permission from the conference president. He says I can go and I will go. So he said, okay, I will buy your airfare from Bulawayo, actually, in Rhodesia, all the way down to Johannesburg. I will give you cash so you can rent a car and go to Pretoria and get the papers, get all the paperwork signed. And I'll buy you a ticket from here to Windhoek on South African Airways. And there's a small airline that operates, it's not really an airline, it's just a little charter company that will fly you from Windhoek to Grootfontein, where we will look at in just a minute. So I said, I'm in. We're good to go. So I went up to Salisbury. We went to the government offices there in Rhodesia, in Salisbury, and we got the paperwork. And they asked me, "Are you sure you're going to be able to get permission for these people to come through South Africa?" I said, "Don't worry. If I've got papers for them to come in here, I will get permission." That's just the way I am. Somehow I just say yes to everything. So anyway, we got those papers. He gave me cash, gave me the money, and I put it in an envelope, put it in my pocket. And I had these papers now signed by the Rhodesian government to say that these 21 people with their names would be admitted into Rhodesia. Okay. So I got on the aeroplane, flew all the way from Bulawayo down to Johannesburg, rented a car, and drove up to Pretoria, went to the government building there. And now that's an interesting story. I went into the government building in Pretoria is a huge, big building. Now I went in there and went up. They have, like at most government buildings, you go up to like a counter in the ground floor, and you can go where you want to go after that. So they tell you where you've got to go if you have any questions. So I told them what I wanted to do. So they said, "Okay, you go to," and I don't remember what floor it was, but I went and got in the elevator, and up I went. Got onto the floor there, went to the office that they told me to go to, saw the number on the door, and spoke to the secretary. And she says, "Well, wait a minute, I'll have to, get you into whatever his name was." I don't remember what his name was now. I was ushered into his office and explained what I wanted. And he says, "Well, I don't have authority to give you permission for something like this, but I'll tell you which office to go to." So he called his secretary in, and she escorted me down the hallway. We went into another office. And the same thing, met the secretary there, told her. She went in and spoke to the gentleman, and she called me in, and I went in and spoke to him, explained what I had to do, and he said, "I don't really have authority for something like this, but you'll have to go to so-and-so." So it ended up, folks, I ended up with the Deputy Minister of Internal Affairs of the South African government. Not the Minister of Internal Affairs, but his deputy, the next one in charge. I ended up in his office, and I said, "Sir, this is what I need to do." And I had the papers, and I showed him the papers and explained to him that these people were in the refugee camp at Runtu. So he said, "Yeah, well, I suppose I can't see any problem with them coming through South Africa. You've got permission for them to go into Rhodesia, so we're not going to be saddled with them." So I said, "No, that's it." So he said, "You are going to deliver these personally to these people, aren't you?" I said, "Yes, I'm taking to them. I will deliver to them personally to the camp." He said, "Oh, okay, fine." He put his government stamp on all the paper. There were about 5 or 6 sheets of paper that had all this information on what they had to do when they came through and all the rest of it. And he put his stamp of approval on it and signed it, the Deputy Minister of Internal Affairs, and off I went. Went back to Johannesburg, got on the aeroplane, flew South African Airways to Windhoek. The name, that's an interesting name, by the way. That is the capital of Namibia, Windhoek. It's a Dutch name. Well, actually originally German, I think it's virtually the same in Dutch though. Windhoek means windy corner. Wind is a wind, and hoek is a corner in Dutch. And I think it's the same thing in German. Windhoek. So that's the capital. Now listen, in case you think that Namibia is just all desert, this is what Windhoek looks like. But what is so interesting is that you get into there and you think that you could have been in any country with just some huge big city buildings and things like that. But as soon as you get outside of the city, That's what you see. You just go a little way outside of the city, and the rest of the country is just like this. Nothing. It's just desert, semi-desert. In fact, down in the southwest part of Southwest Africa, or Namibia as it is known now, is the Namib Desert. That's just pure desert. That's just sand dunes and that. But the rest of Namibia is kind of like this. It's just, I don't know how the animals survive there, but it's teeming with game, and I don't know how they survive, but they do. So, okay, I was now in Windhoek, and now I had to get from Windhoek to Grootfontein, from Grootfontein to Runtu. Well, he'd bought me a ticket from here to there in that little charter. I don't know what, it was a regular service in morning and evening. Morning and evening services. That's where just the plane flew backwards and forwards. It was just a small little airplane. I'll show you a picture of what it was like in a minute. So I had the ticket from there to there. So I was good to go. Was in one of those. That was the kind of airplane, a Piper Navajo, that we actually flew up there to Grootfontein with. Now I had to get from Grootfontein to Runtu. Now if you look carefully on the map, you can see there's a line there. That is the road through a desert scrubland like the pictures that you've seen all the way up to there. Now the idea was that I was going to rent a bakkie. Now a rent a bakkie in South African terminology, it's a Dutch word. It means a little pickup truck, a small pickup truck. We used to seeing Chevys and Dodges and Ford pickup trucks around here. No, it's not that kind of a pickup. It's a small little pickup, very small, little 4-cylinder engine, and it's called a bakkie. I have never seen one over here, so I wouldn't be able to tell you what the description over here, but it's a bakkie. And now the plan was, he'd given me cash and everything. I was to rent a bakkie and go up to Runtu. Well, the people that rented those things was the same people that owned this charter company, this little company that flew the Navajos backwards and forwards between Windhoek and Grootfontein. So I went into the office and I said to the fellow, okay, now this is the plan I've got here. I need to get to Runtu and I'm here to rent a bakkie. Oh no, I'm sorry, we can't do that. So I said, why not? He said, well, south of Runtu and all of this area here in northern Southwest Africa, now in Namibia, is virtually overrun by SWAPO, which was the Southwest Africa People's Organization, was a terrorist group trying to take over Southwest Africa. This was a total mess, this place. And he said, that is a war zone. He said, you'll probably be ambushed, you get killed, we lose our bakkie, or go over a landmine or something. So he says, we can't. He says, incidentally, by the way, the army have closed the road just south of Runtu there, and they won't let anybody backwards out or in. The road is virtually closed. So I said, well, how much would it cost then if I charter the Navajo or one of your aeroplanes go from here to Runtu, and you fly me there? And he told me the price. Well, I didn't have the money for that. I didn't even have enough cash on me to do that. So I said, well, I can't do that because I don't have enough money. But now when I got out of the Navajo and I went into the building, I had noticed that there was 3 Cessna 150s. And if you know what a Cessna 150 is, it's a little 2-seater Cessna, a training airplane, parked outside on the ramp. This kind of airplane, little 2-seaters, used for training. Back in those days, the 150 was the training airplane of the civilian fleet. So I said, well, I'll tell you what. I said, look, I don't have the money. I've got to get there. I said, look, I have come all of these miles. I've come from Guelo, Rhodesia, down through South Africa, all the way up here, thousands of miles at great expense. I've got about 100 miles to go. I can't turn back now. But I said, I'll tell you what. If you could give me an instructor to go with me, as a student pilot, I go fly one of these up there myself. You give me an instructor to go with me, though, because I can't go by myself. I don't have a pilot's license. So he says, they won't let you in there. He said, because that airport is closed to civilian traffic. They will not allow any civilian airplanes to go in there. It's been closed. And that's just the way it is. So I said, look, I'll tell you what. I said, would you phone them? Please. Phone them, explain the situation to them. Tell them I have the names of 21 people in the Rundu refugee camp. I have documentation from the South African government, from the Rhodesian government, to get them out of there through South Africa to Rhodesia. And I can't turn back now. Tell them I've come all the way from Gwelo, but I have the paperwork, but I've got to deliver it. So he says, I know they're going to say no, but I'll phone them anyway. So he picked up the phone at my insistence. He could see I wasn't going to take no for an answer. So he phones them, and I can still remember he explained the situation, and the guy on the other end, he said, "They want to do what?" He screamed into the phone like this, so he's holding the phone like this. And then he explained the whole situation to them again and said, this fella has got to get there. He's got 100 miles to go, and he's come all the way from Gwelo, Rhodesia, and he's got the paperwork to get those people out of the refugee camp. But he's got to get there, and this is the only way we can get him there now. So there was silence, and the guy went away, and it seemed like an awful long time, but probably about 4 or 5 minutes. 4 or 5 minutes seems a long time when you're waiting for something. Eventually the guy came back, and they had quite a long conversation, and then the guy, eventually he put the phone down, and he was kind of laughing, and he said, wow, he said, they agreed. He said, yeah, okay, you can go. But he said, they said, because you are representing the South African and the Rhodesian government, that's the only reason why you can go. And the guy insisted, he told me that only this once, do you understand? He told me on the phone, only this once, this is an exception to the rule, but we'll allow it this one time. So I said, oh, okay. So then he said to me, but now I've got to find an instructor that's stupid enough to go with you. Let me go and find one. So he disappeared down a hallway in the building. And the next thing is he comes back with this young guy. And the young guy, I can still remember, I can see the picture in my face. He came walking down the hall. He said, I knew I should have stayed at home today. I just knew it. I should not have come today. I should have stayed at home. So he says, you want to go to Uruntu and at 150? And I said, I have to go. That's the only way I can go. He says, yeah, okay, I guess I'm stupid enough to go with you. We might as well have an adventure today. He said, I was never, ever expecting to have to do this, but let's go. So we went out there. He made sure the airplane was full of fuel. And I pre-flighted it because I was going as a student, as a student pilot now. So I paid the money and everything. So we get in this aeroplane, and then the fellow that had been on the phone to Runtu, to the airbase up there, said, now when you guys take off, they've told me this is what you've got to do. You've got to climb up to 10,000 feet, and then when you get to 10,000 feet, you then head north up to Runtu. So I immediately said, well, why do we have to go to 10,000 feet? He said, because the SWAPO have surface-to-air missiles. And the missiles that they have are the shoulder launch type. They cannot get to 10,000 feet. But so you have to get to 10,000 feet. So if you go over any SWAPO, movement down there, they won't be able to reach you with the surface-to-air missiles. So, oh, that sounds comforting. Okay, we'll get to 10,000 feet. So we took off, climbed up to 10,000 feet, and we headed up to Uruntu. When we got to Uruntu, found that it was a military airbase. There were South African Air Force jet fighters all over the place, and there were transports. There must have been at least a dozen of these. In the America we call them the C-47. Over there it's a DC-3. They still got the windows in them, but they use them as military transport airplanes. And they were offloading these things, and there were trucks next to them. They were loading the trucks up and everything, all for ammunition and supplies going up to the South African Army who were operating in Angola with the UNITA. So anyway, we saw all of these aeroplanes up there all over the airbase. Now we landed at Runtu and taxied. We were just rolling out and called the tower there. They had an operating tower for their operations, for running the military aeroplanes. And we told them they knew we were coming, that they were quite expecting. They said, turn around and taxi back to the end of the runway and park it off the side of the runway, which we did. The instructor wasn't too happy with that because the airplane was way down at the end of the runway there, and all the military were up there, and he was scared that, if the terrorists were around, they could have blown the thing up. But anyway, it was down there. It was fine. So now we're in Runtu, and we go into the building there in the airport, and I don't know who he was, but anyway, the guy that you go into, he was sitting behind a desk and a counter there, and he said, oh yes, you've come to fetch those people from the camp. I said, yeah, that's right. So he said, okay. Oh, by the way, when we taxied the airplane down there, there were 2 South African Army soldiers came down in a Land Rover. Now, a Land Rover, it's an open vehicle equivalent to the Jeep, the military Jeep. And these two guys with their camouflage, and they both got their assault rifles with them, the one sitting in the back with it like this, and one in the front, and it was between the two seats there. And I sat in the front seat, and the instructor sat in the back seat with the other one, so there were two of them. So they turn around and drive us back up to the building. We went inside, and I went into the office there of, I don't know who it was, probably the commander of the base or something, and showed the paperwork and everything to him, and he was satisfied that everything was good to go. And he said, okay, my men will escort you over the river and into Angola to the refugee camp, and you can do your business there. So I said, fine. Now, these two guys came with me. The instructor had to stay. He was put on a chair there, and he had to sit there. And I went with one of these guys on either side of me. And I'm thinking, wow, this is strange. I got both of these guys, and they got their rifles. And we walked there. So I said to them, you guys don't trust anybody around here, do you? He said, no. He said, no, we trust you. He said, the problem is you don't understand. This is a war zone. And he said, we have snipers every now and again come, and they start firing into the camp and that. And he says, we're here to protect you. That's why we're here. We're here to see that no harm comes to you. And I'm thinking, wow, this is great. So we get down to the river there. There's quite a wide river at that particular place. And we got into this little camouflage boat, aluminum boat with an outboard motor on it. There was a guy that ran it, and he was also in camouflage, also had his assault rifle with him. So we go across the river. I come up to the other side there, and I just saw all of these weird makeshift buildings and a huge big tent. And these two guys said, we go up to the tent there. So we went up to the tent and met Commandant Smith. Commandant Smith was the army officer who was in charge of the camp. Explained my business, and he said, oh yes, they told me they called me on the radio and told me that you were coming. He said, oh, I'm so pleased that you're coming to get some of these people out of here. That's so nice. He was really nice, but he was a big Dutchman, big fella. Black hair came down straight like this, But he was a big fella, very, very nice though, very, very nice person. So he says, okay, come on, let's go over to the camp. So we walked over to the camp. And folks, I must tell you something, it's really strange that, we don't really, in this country, really understand what goes on in those countries like that when we read about these civil wars and things like that. Because as we were walking to the camp, we had to walk down a road like this, and there were all vehicles kind of parked down there. And I just happened to go past and take a notice of these vehicles. And some of them, their tires had been shot out. Some of them were just on the rims. And some of them, their tires were down, but they were kind of like all torn and shredded. Some of them had their windows. You could see where bullets had hit them because there was a hole, and then it was all out. And I looked in some of them. There was blood all over the seats. You could see where people had been shot and they had been bleeding. And it's just a terrible mess. I mean, these cars were just, many of them were just shot up and that. It was so pathetic. It was just terrible. So we got to the office, which was a makeshift building, and right next to it was a makeshift little house that had been built there, like a trailer house kind of thing. And he went and knocked on the door there, and this was the Portuguese liaison between the South African army and the refugees. They were in the camp. And I told him what I was there for, so he said, okay, we'll go into the office. And we went into the office, and he got on the PA system. On the top of the roof of that building, there were two huge, big bellows speakers. And he got on the PA system there, and in Portuguese, he started to say, will the following 21 people please report to the camp office? And he started reading the names. I guess within 3 or 4 or 5 minutes, suddenly there was a crowd of people all around this office, all just hoping, thinking that could it possibly be that I'm going to be one of these people that's let out, but it wasn't. We just had those 21. Then they came through in small groups, the 21. They couldn't all get into the office, but I think about 8 of them did. And I know there was one old lady there, and the brother of the fellow in Rhodesia was there. He was a big Portuguese fellow, and his wife was there. So the camp, this liaison, I guess you call him the camp director, he explained to him what I was there for, why I was there. And when he kind of was explaining that I had the paperwork and everything, this big Portuguese fellow just came over like that, and he just went, "Argh!" And he just squeezed me. I thought I wasn't going to be able to breathe anymore. And his head was on my shoulder, and he was just sobbing and sobbing and sobbing. He was just crying. He was so emotionally charged. And I just saw that the two ladies, the old lady and I think it was his wife, was there, and they were just crying. Oh, they were crying, and tears were coming down their cheeks. What a relief it was for them to know that they could now get out of the camp. Well, anyway, we got back to the base. I delivered my paperwork and everything, and the Commandant Smith told them, okay, you get all your stuff together. You've got the rest of the day, this afternoon. Tomorrow morning, we will let you out. I will give you some armored vehicles with men, and they can escort you down to safety, and you can go. So that was all signed and settled. They were so happy. They were just beside themselves with relief in that. But I can remember when I came out of the office, there's all of these people. They had to make way for us, the two soldiers and myself, as we walked. Those two guys, man, they were like shadows. They were everywhere I was, one on one side and one on the other. They just knew what they were supposed to do. But these people had to just kind of part. I could just see the look on their faces, that earnest look of despair, despondency. It was a very, very moving experience for me too. So we got back to the air base, and now they took us down to the aeroplane, to the little Cessna 150 again in this Land Rover. And they told us, make sure you guys get up to 10,000 feet before you head down south, okay? And get up there as quickly as you can. So, yeah, okay. So we got in the aeroplane, back in the little Cessna again, and off we went. I was flying the aeroplane, and my instructor with me. And when we got up to 10,000 feet, we're heading south, he says, phew. He said, phew. He said, I was nervous back there. So I said, yeah, well, you never know what's going to happen next. So I got back into the Navajo the next morning. No, that afternoon. That's right, it was that afternoon. I got back in that and flew back to Windhoek. And I was staying with Pastor Stradham, who was the Adventist pastor there in Windhoek at that time. Stayed at their place that night. And headed back South African Airways to Johannesburg. And from Johannesburg back up to Rhodesia. Back home again. Now, I must tell you something very, very interesting. While I was in Namibia, Southwest Africa at that time, one of the Trans Africa Division men phoned my wife and said, look, you better get hold of Noel, phone Noel and tell him that those people are not going to be allowed into Rhodesia. He's wasting his time, and all the money that's been spent going over there is useless because they're not going to be allowed into Rhodesia. So I said to her, well, we'll see. So she says, well, I'm just telling you what he said. I'm just relaying the message because he said I had to call you. And she called me at the Stradham's house where I was staying that night. And that's all. So I said, here's the situation. I've already delivered the paperwork and they're already coming. Tomorrow morning they're leaving. So whatever that fellow says in the Trans Africa Division, it's too late. I've already delivered the papers. I'm coming back tomorrow on my way, and that's it. It's over. So I don't care what he says. We'll just see. They're on their way. So anyway, I ended up back in Rhodesia. Well, you might wonder, well, did they get back? Yes, they did. I guess it was about a week later. Yeah, probably about a week or maybe a week and a couple of days. I got a phone call in my office again at the church. And they said they were in Gwelo, passing through. They'd come through Bulawayo. They'd come to Gwelo. They were on their way up to Salisbury. And they just wanted to let me know and to thank me so much that I had got them that far. So I said, stay right where you are. I'm coming into town. So I got in my car. I went into town. And there they were. They had one big truck. He did landscaping or something in Angola, and I don't remember what he all did, but he had this big truck and a smaller truck, and they had a couple of cars, and there they were, right in Rhodesia. So I thought to myself, people say that you can't do this or you can't do that. I don't buy it. You can do all kinds of things if God is in it, and God was in it. I had no question about that. Now I must tell you one thing that I did. I'll tell you that at the end. One of the reasons why I tell you this story, yes, it's an exciting story, and I like telling it. It's an exciting story. It was something that happened in my life that broke up the humdrum of everyday life. It was just, and I'm that kind of a person. I love adventure. I love doing something different. I love, even if it means going into a war zone. It's fine. I'll go. No problem. But the basic reason why I love to tell this story is because it was an object lesson to me of our deliverance from this refugee camp in which we live. This world. This world is a refugee camp. I mean, those of us who have experienced the grace of God and whose lives have been changed, we are no longer welcome in this land, in this world. We're not part of it. And we can't feel comfortable here. Just as those people in that refugee camp, they weren't comfortable there. They were trapped. They couldn't go anywhere. I mean, they could go back, but if they went back, it was almost certain death. If they went back up there, they would almost meet certain death, because that's how bad it was. That's how dangerous it was. There were so many people, thousands of people up there, and the civilians were killed by the FNLA. So we very much are in a very much the same situation. If we want to stay in the world, well, death is the certainty, for the wages of sin is death. But here's some interesting verses of Scripture I wanted to bring to you this morning that parallel that story. And you shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. Therefore, if the Son makes you free, you shall be free indeed. Now, these people were free indeed. They had the documentation, they had everything they needed to get out of their situation from bondage to freedom. And we have everything that we need. We've got all the documentation and the Scriptures that we need to get us out of our bondage and into freedom. And we know the truth, because the truth is revealed to us in the Scriptures. Just as when I gave them those papers, that was the truth. There was truth in those papers there. You are free to go through South Africa and go to Rhodesia. And they knew it. They didn't have to. They could have stayed there if they'd wanted to, because the South Africans could not have forced them to go through South Africa and go to Rhodesia. The Rhodesians couldn't have forced them to go. But they chose to, because they knew that these documents had now made them free. What then? Now, I just want to bring these because it shows you something of this parallel between the situation in which we find ourselves and the situation that those people were in. What then? Shall we sin because we are not under law but under grace? Certainly not. Do you not know that to whom you present yourselves slaves to obey, you are that one slave to whom you obey, whether of sin to death or of obedience to righteousness? They could have stayed there. They could have decided to go back where they came from and face death. But God be thanked that though you were slaves of sin, yet you obeyed from the heart that form of doctrine to which you were delivered. And having been set free from sin, you became slaves of righteousness. They believed that those documents were true, accurate, and were their freedom. They believed it. They just believed that this is that they were now free to go. That's what Paul tells us here. But God be thanked that though you were slaves of sin, though they were in bondage in that camp, they couldn't go anywhere except back to where they came from. They were slaves then. Yet you obeyed from the heart. They just obeyed. They loaded up their vehicles and off they went. Oh, it's just a beautiful parallel. Therefore you are no longer a slave but a son, and if a son, then an heir of God through Christ. Now here's something very interesting for us to remember. We are not slaves to this world anymore, to sin and degradation and the condemnation of sin. We are not bound by those things anymore. We are not a slave to that. We are being delivered. And we are an heir of God through Christ. These people had a homeland now. They had somewhere to go. They had a land that was free. That was in a distance. It was far away. But they could go to it now because they had been set free. Their brother had set them free. For both he who sanctifies and those who are being sanctified are all of one. They were Portuguese. His brother was Portuguese. This one was Portuguese. The whole family was Portuguese. And so they were one. And those who are being sanctified are all of one, for which reason he is not ashamed to call them brethren. It was his brother. It was his next of kin. It was his own family, if you like, his family group. All 21 of them were related, cousins and brothers and so on. So they were all related. And folks, we're related to the family in heaven. We are. Jesus is our elder brother. There's just a beautiful parallel here between the two situations. Now, this is what I was saying. Truly, if they had called to mind that country from which they had come out, they would have had opportunity to return. They could have gone back up there if they'd wanted to. But now they desire a better, that is a heavenly country. Therefore God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he has prepared a city for them. Their brother in Rhodesia had prepared a place for them. He'd made arrangements for them to come in, to take care of them, to guarantee their safety, to guarantee their livelihood. They wouldn't become a drain on society. He'd guaranteed all that. So just like we have a God in heaven who's prepared a city for us. He has a place for us. And it's available to us. It's a heavenly country. And we desire a better country, just as they were going to a better country, one where they didn't have to face the danger and perplexities of Angola. Now, notice this one. He has delivered us from the power of darkness and translated us into the kingdom of the Son of his love, in whom we have redemption through his blood, the forgiveness of sins. Just as that brother had made a way for them, delivered them from Angola to Rhodesia, from war-torn Angola to Rhodesia. He delivered them from that. I was just the means by which these things were transacted. So we too, and this is a verse of scripture which really, it's dynamite. He has delivered us. He has delivered us from the power of darkness and translated us into the kingdom of the Son of his love. Folks, we are already subjects of his kingdom. We don't have to look forward into the future sometime to become a subject of his kingdom. We already are, because he has already delivered us from the power of darkness and translated us into the kingdom of the Son of his love. Do you want to know where your citizenship is? It's in heaven. And the reason why is not because of any goodness that we have done, because it's in whom we have redemption through his blood, the forgiveness of sins. We have it. It's been purchased for us by Jesus. And so we too, we look for a better country, a heavenly home. Folks, that's the parallel. Just as they looked for Rhodesia to become a new home for them, and they got there. So we look for a better country, a heavenly home. I'm sure that none of us here, none of us really want to stay in this world as it is. It's just deteriorating at an alarming rate. I can remember when I came over to the United States back here in 1978. It's not the same country. It's a completely different country. And as for South Africa and those countries back there, they're completely different. There is nowhere in this world that I would want to go today and say, well, you can keep heaven, I go here. There's nowhere. It just isn't there. And by the way, I just wanted to mention there in passing that when I landed, this is one of the reasons why I came to the United States. When I was in Malawi, the doctor who was also a pilot there, Dr. Harvey, Jack Harvey, he was also a flight instructor at the local flying club. And he had taken me out there because he knew of my interest in aeroplanes. We'd gone out there, and I'd done some time with him in some of the club aeroplanes, done a little bit of instruction from him. And when I got to, this had really whetted my appetite to get into the mission field as a mission pilot. That's what I wanted to do. So when we landed at Runtu, I turned to the instructor. We'd landed and we were taxiing up to the building. We were coming up to the ramp there to stop and that. And I said to him, look, I've got a question I want to ask you. And I said, I don't mind. If you don't want to answer it, but I would like you to answer it, and I want you to be perfectly honest. I don't want you to just tell me what you think I want you to tell me. I want you to tell me the truth, what it is that you really think. So he said, sure, what is the question? So I said, well, here's the question. I would really like to get into mission flying. Okay, I'm a pastor in Gwelo, which he already knew. I said, but I would like to get into mission flying, be a mission pilot. And what I'm asking you is, you have flown with me now from here, Fruitfontein to Runtu, and from Runtu back again. With your just limited knowledge of me and my flying ability, would you encourage me to pursue that possibility, or would you say, no, don't do that, that is not for you? And he said, well, I have absolutely no question whatever. He said, I would encourage you to do it, because he said, when you told me it was a couple of years ago and you've only got a couple of hours instruction, he said, you did a greaser landing up there in Runtu. He said, I was amazed. He said, I was just surprised that you could do that. And he said, it's very seldom that we get a person come in here and I fly with them the first time that they can do what you've done. He said, you somehow or other, you've just absorbed this stuff. I said, yeah, well, I've read a lot about it. And he said, look, you go for it, because he said, you really can. You really be a good pilot. You can fly. You've got the skill. There's no question about it. So thank you. So it was on my way back to Johannesburg while I was flying back in the airline. I was thinking about that, and that's when I decided that I was going to come to the United States and get into mission flying. Well, I never ever actually got into official mission flying. I did a couple of stints up in Canada, northern Canada, with an aeroplane. The only way you could get there is with an aeroplane. And I did a couple of those, but other than that, I never got into it. But that was one of the reasons why I came to the United States, was because of that experience. So I just thought I'd mention that to you. But you know, overall, the whole thing is when I got back to Rhodesia, I got to thinking about this whole story, everything that had happened. And it just reminded me, it just became very, very forcibly impressed upon my mind that it was a little parallel here. These people were stuck in that refugee camp. No way of getting out. They were in a hopeless situation. And yet their brother, just like our elder brother in the heavenly sanctuary in the heavens above, has got deliverance for us and has sent his angel to come down and to deliver us. And when he comes the second time, his angels will seek out those who have put their faith in him and who are looking up to say, this is our God. We have waited for him, and he has come to save us and to take us home. Let's pray. Father in heaven, we thank you for the many and varied experiences in life that we have that all point to your goodness and your grace. And as we have just relived some of these stories this morning of this deliverance of this family of 21 peoples as they were able to go from Angola to Rhodesia, now Zimbabwe, we just thank you, Lord, that we can see a parallel in it. We thank you for the lesson that you've given us. And we do look up to you as our elder brother, knowing that by your blood you have redeemed us and that you have a place waiting for us in the heavenly kingdom. And as always, we thank you in Jesus' name. Amen.